Poverty in Dollars, What Are We Missing? By Liam and Kendall.
So what is poverty, and how do you measure it? Poverty is such a small word with such large connotations. For some people, the word poverty brings to mind the starving children in Africa. Others envision homelessness in America. A few, who may have taken a course on poverty at some point in their lives, may start spewing forth numbers on the official poverty measure, supplemental poverty measure, or capabilities. Today, poverty affects about 13.5% of the population in the U.S. based on the OPM. We will attempt to redefine poverty in such a way that society can grasp a better understanding of what it means to be impoverished. We will define poverty in terms of three fundamental capabilities. The first we will define as the capability of health, which can be thought of in terms of life, prosperity, physical health, and bodily integrity. Our second capability we call free-mindedness. This can be thought of as the ability to imagine, to have emotions, to think, and to reason. Finally, we define the remaining capability as harmony, which is the ability to live and play with others, interact with others in the social context within the community, and to be able to participate in politics. We believe that someone who is considered impoverished is unable to fulfill all of these three fundamental capabilities, and therefore does not have basic human dignity. Wait, hold up. What does this all mean? What exactly is a capability? What happened to the common definition of poverty as not having enough money? Well, let us begin by defining capabilities. Capabilities aim to measure the well-being of an individual. That is, what a person can and cannot do. For example, nourishing oneself, having a family, collaborating with others, working, or maintaining one's health. These capabilities can be chosen from, like a collection, and what is actually done by the person would be his or her functioning. Let us give you an example. Let us look at two individuals. If both of these individuals are starving, that is their functionings. However, if one of the two is fasting for a religious holiday, he or she has the capability to be nourished, but chooses not to be. Conversely, if the other does not have the means to properly nourish him or herself, he or she does not have the capability to be nourished. In this example, the first individual would not be considered poor, while the second would. Many theorists have tried to define what capabilities matter and how they work alongside poverty. One famous theorist, Nussbaum, poses that there are 10 central capabilities that every human needs in order to live a dignified life. The first capability is life, which is the ability to have a lengthy life without premature death. The second is bodily health, which is having good health, free of diseases, and nourishment to shelter and the ability to reproduce. The third is bodily integrity, which is being able to move around safely, to have protection from violent or sexual assaults. The fourth is senses, imagination, and thought. This is having the cognitive processes to think critically, perceive the world in a conscious way, and have the ability to use your imagination to connect thoughts with one's own mind. The fifth is emotion, which is the ability to form attachments, to experience interpersonal connections, and to form relationships in a healthy way. The sixth is practical reason, which is the ability to form morals and act on them, to be able to critically think about good and bad, and to make assessments and judgments about one's own life in this said context. The seventh is affiliation, which is being both able to live with others and interact in a socially healthy manner, as well as being able to show and be shown social respect such that there is an absence of discrimination. The eighth is other species, which is being able to live in harmony with nature and to respect all other life on this planet. The ninth is play, which is the ability to laugh and to have fun in one's own free time. Finally, the 10th is control over one's environment, which is both being able to participate in political practice so that laws can be made which affect the people, as well as equality in the ability to own land or seek out a job. These central capabilities seem to be vital for one to lead a dignified life. However, we felt that they were a lot to have to consider in a workable definition of poverty. We condensed these such that the first three capabilities were accounted for under our first fundamental capability, health. Capabilities 4, 5, and 6 were accounted for in our second fundamental capability, free-mindedness. The rest of Nussbaum's capabilities we felt were covered by our fundamental capability, harmony. So why are we talking about capabilities instead of dollars? And how does the government today measure poverty? One theorist, Amartya, brings to light the idea that basic capabilities set for a person not to be in poverty will differ across regions. In poorer countries, one's basic needs may be all that is needed to be met in order to not be physically impoverished. But in a more affluent country, an individual may need more than the basic capabilities to be included in society. Just because someone has enough basic capabilities to nourish, clothe, and house him or herself and those who depend on him or her, that does not mean that they can be functioning members of society. If this family cannot go on the street without being ridiculed by others, then they do not have the capability to live a social life and therefore cannot have a dignified life. However, our government and official poverty measures today do not recognize this. Today, we measure poverty using the OPM and the SPM. Both the OPM and SPM measure whether people have sufficient income to pay for the basic necessities. The next question you should be asking yourself is, what is the OPM and the SPM? The OPM is the current official poverty measure in the U.S. It is an absolute measure of poverty that takes into account only gross annual income before tax income of a family. Poverty thresholds are determined by 3 times the food index needed for a basic food basket cost in 1963. Those below certain thresholds will receive government benefits to help lift them out of poverty. The OPM does not account for inflation. It does not take into account the changes in cost of living. Today, food is no longer the main expense. Housing, clothing, and utilities are rising in percentage of spending among families. The OPM also does not account for differing costs of living throughout the years. Since its inception, the proportion of income that families spend on food has dropped while the cost of shelter and other utilities has risen, leaving the OPM out of date in its measurement techniques. It does not measure the depth of poverty. It only measures on a binary scale. Additionally, the OPM does not account for differences in living expenses in different geographical locations. The cost of living in a large city may be very different than that of the cost of living in a rural area, and the OPM does not account for that, which can cause a large problem in the labeling of those in poverty. In order to try and combat some of these downfalls, the National Academy of Science proposed a supplemental poverty measure in an attempt to measure who is really in poverty. The SPM measures income plus in-kind benefits and near-cash benefits and subtracts work-related and out-of-pocket medical expenses. The SPM measures everyone's spending on FCSU, which is food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, and finds a 33rd percentile. It then multiplies this number by 1.2 to allow for some additional funds. The final number is the threshold that they establish. This threshold is updated every 5 years to account for changes in living and spending patterns. The SPM is also adjusted geographically to account for different living expenses in different areas. The SPM does have some downfalls. It is also binary and still cannot account for how far into poverty each measured individual is. Additionally, because the SPM measures near cash and in-kind benefits, it could not be used to determine who needs such programs without risking a paradoxical dilemma. Because these are the 2 measures of poverty used by the government and therefore our policymakers and news organizations, what does this say about what we believe poverty is? Both of these measurements lead to the belief that poverty is a form of income lowness. Given that it is measured in dollars, that shows that people believe that poverty is simply a lack of such dollars. We agree with Amartya when he states that governmental policies are based on what is easily measurable, dollars, but he believes that how we define poverty should go beyond that. Poverty is not just a form of income lowness, and it should not be simplified to just an easy measure of income. This falls under what is called the fallacy of measurement. This is the falsely held belief that something, poverty, must be defined in terms that it can be measured. Money. If it is defined by a lack of money, then finding those lacking the necessary amount can be quantified. However, poverty can be more than just a lack of money. It is a lacking in capabilities. Sen believes that we should be defining poverty as a failure of basic capabilities to reach some minimal level. Everyone should have the ability to choose among a set of functionings, and in that set of functionings, everyone should have the ability to have his or her basic needs met. This is where our fundamental capabilities come into play. We believe that the 3 fundamental capabilities that we have proposed are encompassing enough to include all that would be needed by an individual to meet his or her basic set of needs. while still being simple enough to be widely accepted into society. While measuring capabilities may be extremely subjective and difficult, we feel that these three fundamental capabilities are simplified in such a way that all humans can grasp the need for each one of them. The inability to reach an absolute threshold, such that an individual does not have the capability to satisfy one of the three fundamentals, will be considered poverty.